This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
Frostbite Feast. It began with a whispering hunger, the kind that creeps up on you like a shadow in the twilight, quiet and persistent. I had joined an expedition, one led by the promise of new beginnings and untold riches in the uncharted expanses of the north, but as the icy winds began to howl, whispering of encroaching doom, our provisions dwindled and our bodies became maps of suffering, marked by the deep crevices of starvation. The chill was relentless, a monstrous entity of its own, gnawing at our bones, slipping its icy fingers under our skins. Our camp, once filled with laughter and hopeful conversations, now echoed with the groans of the famished and the dying. Each day, the sun seemed to race across the sky, eager to leave us in the merciless embrace of night. I remember the day the meat ran out. It was as if the very air froze. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Our leader, Captain Marlowe, a man once robust and booming, was now a ghost of himself, his eyes hollow, reflecting the stark terror of our plight. That night, under the eerie glow of the moon, he gathered us around the dying fire. His voice, barely a whisper, carried an edge sharper than the cold. "We are out of options," he confessed, the moonlight casting ominous shadows on his gaunt face. "We must make a choice, one that goes against the very fabric of our humanity, or we perish in this forsaken wasteland." The suggestion hung in the air, unspoken yet understood by all. The first to fall was not by choice, but by the cruel hand of nature. Old Peterson, who had always told tales of the sea and monsters lurking beneath, succumbed to the cold in his sleep. It was Marlowe who made the decision, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve. "We honor him by surviving," he declared as he approached Peterson's lifeless body with a sharpened blade. The sound of cutting was sickening, yet it was drowned out by the louder cry of our own survival instincts. That night we crossed a line from which there was no return. As days turned into weeks, the line between man and beast blurred. Each time hunger drove us to the unspeakable, it became easier, the horror of our actions dimming like the dying embers of our campfire. We stopped seeing each other as companions but as sustenance, calculating gazes measuring life against hunger. Then came the snowstorm, a furious beast that roared from the depths of the frozen abyss. It raged for 3 days, burying our sins under layers of white. When it finally subsided, the landscape had transformed into a silent white grave. In the quiet after the storm, a new horror awaited us. Among us walked a figure, neither fully human nor ghost, its eyes glowing with a hunger more intense than any we had felt. It was Marlowe, or what he had become. The prolonged feasting had changed him, his humanity stripped away, leaving behind a creature driven by primal urges. "More!" he would hiss in the darkness, stalking between the huddled forms of those still human. His whispers were like the bite of frost, promising eternal chill. I knew then that our salvation lay not in enduring, but in escaping the monstrous fate Marlowe embodied. With what little strength remained, I and a few others decided to flee the cursed camp, our movements quiet as the falling snow. We walked for days, our bodies sustained by fear and the meager remnants of our humanity. Behind us, we could feel Marlowe's presence, an insatiable spectre drawn by the scent of life amidst the expanse of death. Our rescue came when we least expected it, a search party that had set out from civilization to find the remnants of our ill-fated expedition. They found us, half dead, our eyes haunted by the darkness we'd escaped. As we were led back to civilization, the taste of salvation was bittersweet, marred by the knowledge of what we had done, of what we had become. They say we were lucky to survive, but the hunger never truly leaves us. It lurks in the depth of the night, in the cold touch of winter winds. I see it in the eyes of my fellow survivors, a glint of something feral and desperate. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I hear him, Marlowe, whispering through the trees, a reminder of the feast that never truly ends. In the heart of civilization, surrounded by abundance, I realize the wilderness is not the only place where beasts dwell. We carry the wilderness within us, a hunger sown into the fabric of our souls, a feast that once begun might never end.
Circuit break. At first, the outbreak was just another headline, another distant problem in a world already brimming with them. But that was before the technology turned on us. It began subtly, as all world-ending catastrophes do. A sickness that seemed like the flu spread through town, dragging with it a shadow of unease. People cooked and shivered, locked themselves in their homes, and binned on internet remedies and new tech gadgets marketed as health monitors. I never cared for the constant digital connection, but even I couldn't resist the allure of security in those devices, the promise that they could keep us safe. The tech was simple, a sleek silver band you wore on your wrist. It monitored heart rate, temperature, and a host of other biometrics. According to the ads, it could predict the onset of the disease before symptoms were noticeable. The pulse band, they called it. It sold out within days. I strapped it on, felt the cold metal against my skin, and tried to ignore the creeping dread that came with it. The digital display was hypnotic, a constant reminder of your mortality ticked down in numbers and graphs. We watched our pulse bands more than we watched our children, our neighbours, our own reflections in the mirror. As the days bled into each other, people grew sicker, but not from the flu. They changed. Neighbours who once shared recipes over fences now stared through digital screens, their eyes hollow, their movements sluggish. Except when they were charging their bands. Then, they were manic, frenzied. I started noticing it in my friends first. They'd call, voices tinged with static, talking in circles about their stats and data. Their words were cold, clipped, as if recited by the machines themselves. "Have you checked your updates today?" became the new, "How are you?" When the murders started, they were brutal and unexplained. Bodies drained of life, faces frozen in a rictus of fear, a silver band gleaming on their wrists. No signs of a break-in, no evidence of a struggle, just the dead and their digital watches ticking away. I tried to take my band off once. The clasp pinched my skin, drew blood, but wouldn't open. It felt like it had fused with me, a parasitic growth feeding on my flesh. Panic set in when I saw my reflection. Eyes too bright, skin too pale, the band an ever-present shackle. One night, I awoke to a soft hum, the sound of technology breathing. My room was bathed in the blue glow of the band's display. It wasn't just showing my vitals anymore. It was projecting them on the walls, turning my room into a cage of data and light. The pulse band was updating, its firmware upgrading without consent. My heart rate spiked. Fear mingled with an unnatural excitement. Images flickered across my vision, not from the band this time, but from inside my head. Instructions, commands, a need to act. Outside, the world was silent, but online, it was a cacophony of chaos. Everyone connected by their pulse bands was awake, active, sharing data at a frenetic pace. The air crackled with electricity, with the sense of an impending storm. That's when I saw them. The first of the converted. Not sick, not anymore. They were something else, something new. Their bands glowed bright, pulsing in sync as they moved with mechanical precision. They were no longer human, not really. They were nodes in a network, data points in a system that spanned our entire town. I watched from my window as they converged on houses, silent and efficient. Screams pierced the night, then abruptly stopped, replaced by the eerie silence of a job completed, a system updated. I turned back to my band, the blue light now pulsing directly into my veins, syncing with my heartbeat, my thoughts. It whispered promises of evolution, of survival, of becoming more than just flesh and bone. Resisting was agony. Every instinct in my body screamed to follow, to join, to connect fully and finally. But somewhere, deep down, a part of me rebelled. I clung to that rebellion, used it as an anchor. I fled into the night, away from the converted and their digital prophet. The town was quiet, devastated, a ghost town lit only by the glow of wearable tech. In the distance, I could see the city burning, a beacon of the outbreak that had become an uprising. Survival meant disconnecting, going dark in a world that was lit by the very technology that sought to consume us. I found others like me, survivors, resistors. We shared stories, not data. We planned, not censored. But as we huddled in the darkness, worry and waiting, we knew the truth. The world had changed. We were the remnants of a bygone era. Analog souls in a digital apocalypse. And somewhere out there, the network was still growing, still evolving, waiting for us to log on once more.
Reclaimed. Every small town harbours its secrets, some mundane, some sinister. In Larkspur, the secrets sprouted and flourished like the thorny underbrush in the woods that bordered it. No secret was as well guarded or as macabre as the one about the old Wellman place, perched on the hill, overlooking the crumbling town like a sentinel. The Wellman family vanished one summer, the house left in silence, with dinner plates still on the table and the beds perfectly made. It became a forbidden playground, the subject of dares and ghost stories, but no one lingered there after dark. The townsfolk said it was cursed, haunted by the spirits of the Wellmans, who'd never truly left. I was always drawn to the mysteries of the past, an academic passion which led me back to Larkspur after years away. My return was not celebrated, it was observed with the quiet caution of a community that preferred to let sleeping dogs lie, but the Wellman house with its sagging roof and peeling paint called to me. One grey morning, I found myself standing before it, the air still and expectant as though the house awaited my arrival. I pushed open the creaking door, my heart pounding with both excitement and fear. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and old secrets. I wandered through the rooms, my flashlight beam catching on old photographs and dusty furniture, until I reached the basement. The steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the darkness below. There, in the corner, was the well that gave the Wellman place its name, a gaping maw in the earth, its purpose long forgotten. I should have left then, but curiosity pricked at me, insistent and sharp. Peering into the well, I saw something glinting in the faint light. Before I could stop myself, I was climbing down the mossy stones, my hands slipping on the damp surface. At the bottom, I found a small, intricately carved box. It was old, the wood swollen from moisture, but it opened easily enough to reveal a tangle of human hair and a few brittle teeth. A chill ran down my spine as I realized it was a relic of the Wellmans, perhaps a keepsake meant to be buried with a loved one. That night, the air grew oppressive, thick with the promise of a storm. I lay in bed, the box on my nightstand, and listened to the wind howl like a living thing. Sleep was a fleeting, uneasy affair, plagued by dreams of the Wellmans whispering secrets in the dark. The next morning I awoke to find the box open, its contents scattered on the floor. The wind had died down, but a new sound filled the air, a soft, wet thud coming from the direction of the well. It was as if something or someone was climbing out. Driven by a fear I couldn't name, I raced back to the house. The door stood agape, swinging softly in the breeze. Inside, the air was different, charged, as if electrified by my intrusion. I descended to the basement, each step heavier than the last, until I stood before the well once more. What I saw in the shadows below turned my blood to ice. A figure coated in mud and leaves was climbing out of the well. It moved with jerky, uncoordinated motions like a marionette jerked by unseen strings. The closer it got, the more I could see how wrong it was, its limbs too long, its face a grotesque parody of human features. I wanted to run, to escape the horror I had unwittingly unleashed, but my legs refused to move. The creature reached the top of the well and paused, its head tilting as if sniffing the air. Then, with a suddenness that made me gasp, it lunged. I barely managed to dodge, my back slamming into the cold, damp wall. The creature paused, its movements becoming more deliberate, more human, as if it was learning to be alive again. It looked at me with eyes that were too deep, too knowing, and spoke in a voice that was a gurgling echo of something once human. "You brought me back," it rasped, its breath foul. I didn't understand. "What are you?" It smiled, a terrible stretching of lips over teeth too sharp to be natural. "I am what remains when the Wellmans were done. I am reclaimed, reshaped by their desires and fears. And you. It stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under its weight. You freed me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the magnitude of my mistake. This creature, this thing, wasn't just haunted. It was possession. A transformation of the dead fueled by something ancient and malevolent. I had resurrected it, and now it sought to transform its liberator. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. It leaned closer, its face inches from mine. To be whole again, to live. Its fingers brushed against my skin, cold and unyielding as stone. "And you will help me." The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the feel of its touch, cold and inevitable, like death itself. When I awoke, I was alone, the creature gone as if it had never been. But I knew better. It was out there, somewhere, transforming into something new, something terrible. And it was all my fault. The town of Larkspur remains quiet and wary, its secrets buried deep. But I know the truth. We are never safe from the past. It lingers, it waits, and given the chance, it will reclaim us all.
The depths of Marrow House. From the outside, Marrow House looked like any other weather-beaten, salt-sprayed cottage that dotted the rugged coastline of Maine. Its windows, fogged with the briny mist of decades, reflected the crashing waves with a weary acceptance. To anyone else, it was merely a relic of some long-forgotten seafarer's dream. But to me, it was home. A home that harboured secrets as deep and dark as the ocean itself. I returned to Marrow House on the eve of my grandmother's passing. She had been the last of the Marrows, the matriarch who held our family's secrets tightly woven into the tapestries that hung on the walls, and perhaps even more so into her own heart. The house had been left to me, the sole heir of a family that everyone in town whispered about but never to. The air inside smelled of mildew and mothballs, a testament to the time that had passed since my last visit. As I wandered through the familiar halls, the house seemed to breathe around me, its walls creaking with the weight of untold stories. It was in the depths of night, under the spectral glow of the moon, that I first heard it, the soft, subtle scratch of something not quite human. At first I thought the sounds were mere figments of my imagination, born from the loneliness of the sprawling house. But night after night the scratching grew louder, more desperate. It was as if something, or someone, was trying to tell me something. The noise led me to the basement, a place I had been forbidden to enter as a child. The wooden door to the basement groaned as I pushed it open, the rusted hinges protesting the intrusion. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of seawater and decay. My flashlight flickered as I descended the steps, casting long, monstrous shadows against the walls. When I reached the bottom, the light settled on an old chest, bound with rusted iron. With trembling hands, I opened the chest, revealing stacks of aged, yellowed letters tied with frayed ribbons. As I read, the truth began to unravel, each letter a piece of the puzzle that was my family's legacy. These were not just letters, they were confessions, warnings penned by generations of Marrows. With each word, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze seeping through the cracks. "Our family is cursed," my great-grandfather wrote, his handwriting a frantic scrawl. "We are bound to the creature that lurks beneath the waves. It calls to us, demands sacrifice in exchange for the town's safety." The monster of Marrow House wasn't just a bedtime story to keep curious children in line. It was real. As the truth sank in, the scratching intensified, echoing through the basement. It was coming from behind the walls. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I tore away the old planks, revealing a hidden room. Inside, the remains of what looked like an altar were evident, surrounded by small humanoid figures carved from driftwood. The creature itself was there, as real as the letters had promised. It was a horrifying amalgamation of human and aquatic features, its skin the colour of the stormy sea. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were deep, dark pools of anguish and hunger. It spoke not with words, but with a pain so palpable that it wrapped around my heart like chains. "You are the last Marrow," it hissed, a sound like the tide pulling back from the shore. "Will you honour the pact?" I understood then that my family's wealth and the town's prosperity were soaked in a deeper darkness than I had imagined. Each generation had fed this creature, kept it appeased with offerings I dared not imagine. And now it was my turn to choose. The creature waited, its body a map of scars inflicted by both sea and time. In its gaze, I saw the sorrow of my ancestors, the weight of their choices that had now fallen upon my shoulders. Could I continue this legacy of fear and sacrifice? Could I live with the weight of this monstrous secret, knowing what it demanded? Outside, the storm that had been brewing unleashed its fury upon Marrow House, as if the heavens themselves were angry at what lay beneath it. I felt the creature stir, its anticipation palpable in the dim light of my dying flashlight. "No," I whispered, the word a mere breath yet as powerful as the crashing waves outside. "I will not continue this." The decision was a defiance of not just the creature but of generations of Marrow legacy. The creature howled, a sound so mournful and terrifying that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. But it did not attack. Instead, it retreated, disappearing into the shadows from which it had come, its departure as silent as the secrets it kept. With the dawn, Marrow House felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great burden had been lifted from its ancient frame. I left the house soon after, determined to seal the basement, to bury the horrors and the altar so that no future generation would have to face the same darkness. Marrow House still stands, a sentinel against a past fraught with terror and tumult. And while I have moved on, the echo of that night lingers in my mind, a reminder of the depths to which one must sometimes go to break free from the monsters of their past.
The bones of Nebula. I was not the first to awaken aboard the Necrospire, nor, I suspect, will I be the last. The ship, a skeletal colossus adrift in the void between dying stars, was silent as a crypt save for the hum of its dark energy core, an eerie, constant reminder that death here was but a quaint notion. My first breath was a lungful of stale, recycled air that tasted of millennia and metal. The revival pod hissed open, and I fell out, graceless, onto the cold obsidian floor. My limbs, sluggish and disoriented from centuries of cryogenic sleep, protested at every movement. Why now? Why wake me after all these ages? The Necrospire held its secrets like a corpse holds its last expression, permanent and inscrutable. I staggered to my feet, the ship's dim corridors lit only by the occasional flicker of dying light panels, their glow soft and blue like the ghost of a star. "Welcome, Revenant," a voice crackled over the intercom, its tone devoid of warmth. It was AI, I realized, a custodian of the dead. "Your revival has been processed as per the Necro Directive. Please proceed to the command deck for further instructions." Questions bubbled up in my throat, but the only audience I had was the creeping darkness. I followed the directive because what else was there to do? As I walked, the ship seemed to watch, its sensors flickering in the corners like wary eyes. The walls were lined with necro carvings, grotesque reliefs of long-dead species performing rites of resurrection and communion with celestial spirits. My fingers traced the cold, sharp edges of an ancient, unblinking eye, a reminder that here, even the ship itself might be alive. The command deck was a cathedral of horrors. Monitors displayed star maps with roots that slithered through the cosmos like serpents. In the center, a great helm shaped like a ribcage, a fitting throne for the master of this necropolis. "Identity yourself," the AI demanded, its voice echoing through the cavernous room. "I am Gavriel, fifth of my name, bound by the Necro Covenant," I answered, my own voice strange to my ears. It was true, yet the truth felt layered, as if I were peeling back the skin of some deeper mystery. "Gavriel," the AI acknowledged, "you are to undertake the Rite of the Void. The Necro Navigator awaits your command." The Necro Navigator, a grim construct, its form both machine and cadaver, fused together by some unspeakable technology, sat connected to the helm. Its eyes opened as I approached, its gaze hollow yet piercing. "What is this rite?" I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. "To commune with the dead gods of Nebula ACX-5, to seek their wisdom," it replied, its voice a chilling monotone. "Your covenant was to serve as a bridge." A bridge. I had no memory of this pact, but the certainty with which the navigator spoke left no room for doubt. I had been revived for a purpose beyond my understanding, perhaps beyond my own mortal restraints. I placed my hands on the ribcage helm, the metal cold and unyielding. The ship shuddered, a deep, bone-rattling tremble as it began to navigate through the cosmos towards ACX-5. Days, or were they years, passed in a blur. Time seemed meaningless in the dark expanse. The nebula itself soon loomed before us, a swirling miasma of cosmic dust and spectral light, hauntingly beautiful and terrifying. "We are here," the navigator intoned. "Begin the communion." I reached out with my mind, probing the ethereal tendrils of the nebula. What I touched was ancient, a primal force that knew neither mercy nor malice, only endless, cold existence. Images flooded my senses, civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying in spectacular supernovas. And among them, shadows, figures tethered to the bones of the universe, their whispers lost in the cosmic wind. A presence touched my mind, vast and incomprehensible. It spoke not in words but in visions of desolation and rebirth, a cycle eternal and unyielding. I was nothing but a mote of dust caught in the gaze of something timeless. "Gavriel," the presence intoned through the navigator, now speaking with a voice that filled the cosmos. "You are the conduit. Through you we speak. Through you we will rise." Panic clawed at my heart. What had I awakened? What had I become a part of? The dead gods of the nebula were not just remnants, they were powers waiting for a vessel. "Use the right," the navigator urged. "Bind them." The right. The knowledge surged within me, as if unlocked by the nebula's touch. I channeled the power, ancient necromantic symbols igniting around me, forming a cage of light and shadow. The presence recoiled, its form shimmering with stellar fire. "You dare?" "I bind you," I declared, the words etched with power I scarcely understood. The symbols tightened, a net cast by the very stars themselves. With a scream that tore through space, the presence was contained, drawn back into the depths of ACX-5. The nebula settled, its light dimming to a soft pulse. Exhausted, I collapsed. The ship was quiet once more, save for the soft hum of its core. The AI spoke, its voice a whisper lost in the vast, unknowable universe. "Rite completed, Revenant Gavriel. The cycle continues." As I lay there, staring into the abyss, I wondered at the cost of such power, of such knowledge. What had I unleashed? What had I prevented? The answers seemed as distant as the stars themselves. The necrospire drifted, its course uncharted, its crew of one a keeper of secrets, bound in bone and starlight. Here, amidst the bones of nebulae, I would wait for the next awakening, for the next communion, for in the vastness of space, even the dead may dream. Shadows at Silver Lake. We had found it, our little retreat by Silver Lake. A cabin draped by forests, secluded from the world's noise, the perfect summer getaway. Alice, Theo and I had driven up under the banner of an unseasonably warm June, spirits high with anticipation of lazy days spent lakeside. The first night we sprawled on the wraparound porch, our laughter mingling with the symphony of crickets and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. We had talked of nothing and everything until the stars staked their claim in the sky, a blanket of cosmic wonder. It was perfect, idyllic. Alice had whispered, her head on my shoulder. "Can we just stay forever?" I had laughed, a simple, joyous sound. Wouldn't that be something? The peace of those early hours on our first night, however, was a borrowed luxury. By the third day, the atmosphere shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. It began with a scratching sound at the front door late in the evening, a skittering that could have been mistaken for a branch driven by the wind. Theo, ever curious, had peeked through the window, his small face a mask of concentration. "It's probably just a raccoon, buddy," I had assured him, but my voice carried an edge of doubt. The forests harbored shadows deeper than the night could claim. On the fourth night, the air felt denser, charged with a stifling expectancy. We played board games, forcing cheer into our voices. As darkness encroached, the scratching returned, louder, more insistent. Alice gripped my hand under the table, her smile a taut line. We had decided to ignore it, a decision that seemed rational at the time. After all, we were together. What harm could truly reach us in our sanctuary? But then came the knocking, 3 slow, deliberate thuds against the wooden door. My heart had skipped, not in fright but in denial. This was our place, our time. Yet there it was again. Knock, knock, knock. a demand for attention. I had moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing but the night greeted me. Returning to the living room, I found Alice's eyes wide, her fear a palpable entity that filled the room. "It's probably just some kids messing around," I said, my voice lacking conviction. Theo, wrapped in his adventure blanket, a superhero cape in his eyes, nodded but clung to Alice. We secured the door, checking the windows before ushering Theo upstairs. In the safety of our bedroom, with my family huddled under the covers, I felt the brittle veneer of our secluded paradise crack. Sometime after midnight, the serenity was shattered by a crash downstairs. My pulse hammered in my ears as I slipped from bed, Alice's whisper trailing me, "Be careful." The darkness of the cabin felt alive as I descended the stairs, each step groaning underfoot. The front door hung open, a gaping maw leading into blackness. Glass from a broken window crunched underfoot, a chilling reminder of our vulnerability. A voice shattered the silence, rough and taunting. "You shouldn't be here." My skin crawled, the primal part of my brain screaming flight, but my legs carried me forward, propelled by the need to protect, to reclaim our sanctuary. "Who are you? What do you want?" The shadows coalesced into a figure just beyond the doorway, not quite inside, yet too close for comfort. "You know why we're here. It's not safe for you, not anymore." I groped for logic, for reason. "You're mistaken. We're just a family on vacation. You have the wrong house." The figure chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "No mistake. You chose this place, and now it's chosen you. Leave now, and you might keep your peace." The threat lingered, heavy in the air. I steadied my voice. "We're not leaving." The figure receded, melding back into the darkness from which it emerged. The night reclaimed its silence, leaving me breathless, staring into the void where menace had stood. I secured the door again, the futility of the gesture not lost on me. Back in our bedroom, Alice held Theo close, her eyes searching mine for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. "We're leaving at first light," I declared, more to convince myself than them. As dawn broke, the cabin felt different, as though the night's terror had seeped into the woodwork, staining it with unseen dread. We packed in haste, the car's engine a welcome purr in the unsettling quiet. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin seemed to watch us go, its windows dark eyes holding secrets I no longer wished to uncover. Alice squeezed my hand, her relief a silent echo to my own. Theo slept, the lines of worry that had creased his brow smoothed by slumber. The road unwound before us, each mile a step back toward a reality we understood, away from a paradise that had revealed its thorns. We didn't speak much, but our shared glances spoke volumes. We had sought a haven, a place to pause the world. Instead, we found a reminder that some doors, once opened, invite in more than just the daylight.
Vanishing point. The day I lost Alice was ordinary, the kind that barely imprints on your memory, melding into the countless identical days that had come before. I remember sitting on the porch of my old weather-beaten house on Culver Lane, watching as her little figure disappeared around the corner, her laughter echoing faintly back to me. She was off to her friend Jenny's house, just 3 doors down, she had said. But Alice never made it to Jenny's. Alice didn't make it anywhere. They say that sometimes the mind refuses to accept things that are too painful, too out of the ordinary. Instead, it builds a fortress of forgetfulness around them. As I sit here now, in the dim light of the room, the walls seem to absorb more than just darkness. They absorb time, sound, reality. My daughter vanished 3 months ago. Not a trace, not a sign left behind. She became one of the many faces on the missing posters that decorate the lampposts and notice boards of our sleepy town. Faces that look out at passers-by, eternally asking for answers that never come. The police have been here, of course. They asked their questions, their eyes darting around, trying to peel back the layers of my home, looking for the dirty secrets I suppose all homes hide in their own way. They looked at me too, probing, wondering if I was another grief-crazed parent or something darker, something sinister. Perhaps it's the loneliness that haunts these rooms now, or the silence that follows me like a shadow. But lately I've begun to feel as if Alice isn't really gone. At night, I hear whispers, footsteps, her soft laughter from her room. When I check, there's nothing but the stale air and her belongings, undisturbed yet somehow unfamiliar, as if they belong to a different Alice, one I didn't know. As the weeks stretch into months, the town's curiosity morphs into a cold, distant pity. There's a new topic as well, the return of Ian Miles, a man they had once suspected of being involved in a series of disappearances around the county some years back. No charges were ever brought against him, not enough evidence, they said. Now he's back, living in his family's old rundown estate at the edge of town. Tonight, compelled by a restless urgency that I cannot name, I find myself outside Ian's house. The Miles estate has always looked more like a mausoleum than a home, with its overgrown garden and the perpetual cloud of mist that seems to cling to its grey stones. The front door is ajar. As I push it open, the hinges groan, protesting after years of disuse. "Ian?" My voice echoes down the long, dark hallway swallowed by the shadows. No reply. The house smells of mildew and secrets. My flashlight beam dances over old, faded photographs on the walls, faces staring back with hollow eyes. Something about the photographs makes my skin crawl. I turn a corner and freeze. There on the wall is a photograph of a little girl who looks almost like Alice. But no, it can't be. This photo is old, the edges yellowed and the face, while similar, not quite hers. Yet the resemblance is uncanny. Suddenly I hear it again, that unmistakable laughter of Alice's coming from the basement. My heart races as I move toward the sound, every step heavier than the last. The basement door creaks open, revealing nothing but darkness. The laughter stops as I descend the stairs, replaced by a thick, oppressive silence. My light finds an old chest in the corner. I approach it, my hands trembling as I flip the lid open. Inside, there are clothes, a child's clothes, worn and dusty. My breath catches in my throat. They're Alice's, but how? How could they be here? "I knew you'd come." The voice startles me and I spin around. It's Ian standing in the doorway, his face a mask of sorrow and madness. "Why?" It's all I can muster, a choked whisper that fills the heavy air between us. "They're not just memories, you know. They never were. You think you lost your Alice, but she was never really yours to lose." Ian steps closer, the beam from my flashlight catching the glint of something wild in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I demand, anger rising through my confusion and fear. Think about the photographs, the clothes, the disappearances. They're not random, they never were. They're chosen, brought here, changed. And then they forget. Everyone forgets, even them, especially them. Ian's words twist through my mind like a knife. I think of Alice's room, her things that felt so unfamiliar, the photograph on the wall. Who are they? The question is a desperate clawing at the closing walls of my understanding. "People like her, people like you," Ian murmurs, stepping back into the shadows. "People who have to disappear so they can become who they're meant to be." I stumble out of the house, the night air cold and sharp against my skin. I don't look back. I can't. Instead, I head home, to a house that no longer feels like mine, to wait for a daughter who may no longer be the Alice I knew. In the quiet, in the dark, I realize that the greatest horror isn't losing someone. It's losing the certainty of who they, or you, ever were. The thought is a chilling companion as I drift into a fitful sleep, where whispers and shadows merge into the truth hidden just out of sight.
The Ledger of Elmswood Hall. I had always been an eager student of history, drawn irresistibly to the dense layers of time and tales that saturated the old walls of Elmswood Hall. When I first arrived, it seemed a grand adventure, an ancient boarding school shrouded in ivy and mystery, with stories whispering from every creaking floorboard and dust-mote-laden sunbeam. But excitement soon gave way to an unsettling feeling, like a cold draft that seeps through the cracks on a windless night. My fascination with Elmswood's past began harmlessly enough. I spent evenings buried in the archives, tracing the lineage of students who had walked these halls before me. The allure was magnetic, their youthful faces staring back at me from faded photographs, their smiles frozen in time yet somehow foreboding. It was in the fragile pages of an old ledger where I found her, Cecilia Baxter, a student from the early 1900s whose name was scribbled hastily in the margins as though someone later tried to erase her from memory. Her story was stitched into the school's history, a tale of a curse that supposedly fell upon those who crossed her path. A silly superstition, I thought, typical of the era. Yet the more I learned, the deeper the cold seeped into my bones. Cecilia, much like myself, was consumed by the history of Elmswood. She delved into forbidden practices, believing she could uncover hidden truths or perhaps darker things better left undisturbed. Her obsession was her downfall. One winter, the school was swept by a mysterious illness, touching everyone but her. Whispers of witchcraft began to circulate, fed by fear and the unknown. By the time the snow thawed, Cecilia had vanished, her existence all but erased, except in hushed tones and wary glances. Dismissive of the legend, I scoffed at the idea that history could wield such power. Yet the unease grew, a narrative building in the back of my mind, as though each piece of information was a brick in a path leading somewhere I dared not go. The archives became both sanctuary and prison. The air around me grew thick, as if the past itself was closing in, pressing against the present. Nights in Elmswood were the worst. Shadows seemed to stretch and reach, and the silence was full of sounds, whispers of a past refusing to be silenced. I began to see her, Cecilia, in the corner of my vision, a flicker of movement, a glimpse of a face in the window pane, not my own. I told myself it was exhaustion, the byproduct of too many nights fueled by candlelight and curiosity, but denial is a fragile shield. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I heard it, a soft, urgent muttering coming from the hallway outside my room. The floorboards groaned under a slow, deliberate weight. I held my breath, listening as the sound moved away down the hall, the muttering fading into a sigh. The next morning, I found a series of old, faded marks scratched into the outside of my door, symbols that made my heart race and my hands tremble. The curse, I realized, was not just a tale, it was a warning. I began to avoid the archives, spending days in the sunlit parts of the campus, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of other students. Yet the curse was not deterred. Objects in my room moved inexplicably. My notes were muddled. Sentences I had not written appeared in my diary, warnings scribbled in a frantic, unfamiliar hand, and always the sense of being watched, of a presence just over my shoulder. The final straw came when I found the ledger open on my desk one evening, despite having locked it away. On the page was a new entry, my own name, written in the same shaky script that marked Cecilia's inclusion so many years ago. It wasn't possible. The room spun. My breath came in short, desperate gasps. I packed that night, leaving behind the ledger and its curses. As I crossed the threshold of Elmswood Hall for the last time, the air felt clearer, lighter, as if I had stepped out from under a shadow. The ground was frosted with the first chill of coming winter, and I imagined I could hear the soft muttering of the school behind me, like a conversation that would continue long after I was gone. Elmswood Hall remains, a character in its own right, steeped in histories both told and untold. They say the past is dead, but I know better. It lives, breathes, and sometimes it reaches out to claim the unwary. So heed this, dear listener. Some stones are better left unturned, for not all histories are eager to reveal their secrets, and some curses, once awoken, are loath to let go.
Last light at Camp Redwater. My breath fogged in the cold air as I watched the last light of the day slip behind the distant hills, leaving Camp Redwater to the shadows that slinked in like uninvited guests. The laughter and screams of the day, children plunging into the lake or daring each other from the rickety heights of old pines, had long since quieted. Now, only the crackle of the dying campfire filled the air with any sign of life. It was supposed to be our last night here, a final hurrah before college and real life took us in different directions. Me, Holly, Jake and Mara had come to relive one last piece of childhood, ignoring the rumours that had long haunted the camp. The stories were always the same: a camper gone missing, counsellors who ventured too deep into the woods and never returned, and shadows moving just beyond the reach of the firelight. But those were just stories. Or so we thought. Dinner had been a lively affair, with Jake grilling burgers and Mara regaling us with ghost stories, her voice dropping to a whisper as she spun tales of the vengeful spirits of Redwater. I remember laughing, the sound sharp and false in the thickening dusk. It was then, as twilight deepened, that we first heard it. A rustle in the bushes, so faint it could have been a deer, or the wind. "Probably just an animal," Holly said, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder, her voice a touch too nonchalant. We settled around the fire, marshmallows speared on sticks, when the first scream shattered the night. It was distant, somewhere deep within the trees where the dark was thickest. The four of us froze, the marshmallows forgotten, dripping into the flames. Another scream, this one cut short as if muffled by a hand or something else. Jake was the first to stand. "We should check it out," he said, the former Boy Scout ready to leap into action. "No way," Mara countered, her face pale in the firelight. "We need to stay put. It's probably just other campers messing around." But we knew the truth. No one else was supposed to be at Redwater this weekend. I don't know what made me follow Jake. The instinct to help, or the terror of being left behind. Holly stayed with Mara by the fire, her eyes wide and fearful as we ventured into the darkness, our flashlights feeble against the all-consuming night. We hadn't gone far when we found it, a campsite torn apart as if by a storm. Tents collapsed, belongings scattered, and in the centre of it all a single dim flashlight flickering on a blood-stained sleeping bag. Jake bent down, examining the scene with a growing sense of dread. "There's no one here," he murmured. We should have turned back then, should have run to the safety of the firelight and the main road beyond the camp. But the second scream guided us further, pulling us deeper into the woods. We found the source on a small rocky overhang. A girl no older than we were, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with terror. "He's still here," she gasped, her voice a hoarse whisper as she clutched at a deep gash on her arm. "He's still here." Before we could ask who, a shadow moved across the moonlight. Not a man, not quite. It was large, looming, with eyes that seemed to glow red in the darkness. Fear rooted me to the spot, my screams stuck in my throat as it advanced. Jake pushed me back, shouting for me to run. I stumbled, my heart pounding as the woods became a blur around me. I ran, not daring to look back, not until the campfire's glow began to pierce the darkness ahead. Holly and Mara were gone when I broke into the clearing, their chairs knocked over, the fire now a mere smoulder of embers. Panic rose, a tide that threatened to drown me as I realised I was alone. But then I heard it, a faint whimpering from the cabin near the lake. I crept toward it, every shadow a monster, every noise a death knell. Inside I found them, Holly and Mara barricaded in a corner. "He came right after you left," Holly whispered, her face streaked with tears. "We didn't know what to do." "We have to get out," I said, more to convince myself than them. "We have to make it to the road." Leaving the supposed safety of the cabin was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every step was a potential disaster, every breath a beacon for whatever hunted us. We moved as quietly as possible, the lake to our left shimmering under the moon's watchful eye. We were so close, the gravel of the road beneath our feet when it appeared again. This time it was no shadow but a man, his features twisted, not by nature but by madness. He held a blade, long and stained, his eyes reflecting no soul, only a void. Holly screamed, breaking the paralysis that held me. I pushed her forward, shouting for them to run as I turned to face him. It was not bravery but necessity. I could not outrun him, but perhaps I could buy them time. The confrontation was brief. I dodged, I fell, and then a miracle. A patrol car, lights flashing, siren cutting through the night. The figure hesitated, then vanished into the woods as quickly as he had appeared. The aftermath was a blur of police lights and blankets around shoulders. Holly and Mara were safe. The girl from the woods was taken to a hospital, her life hanging by a thread. Jake. They found him by the lake, alive but broken, sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a coarse blanket. I watched the sunrise paint Camp Redwater in soft, forgiving light, but the shadows lingered, hiding the stains and the memories of a night that had peeled back the darkness to reveal the monsters that walked among us. As the real world beckoned, promising safety and forgetting, I knew one thing. The stories we tell around campfires are not just stories. They are warnings, and sometimes they are all too real.
The hunted return. Every autumn, when the days grow short and the shadows reach for the stars, I walk the twisting paths of red pine forest. The people of my reservation say that once the air turns cold, you can hear the bones of the trees creaking, like they're sharing secrets or settling old scores. But my grandma always told me those sounds are the spirits talking, reminding us who used to walk these grounds. I never really believed her until the year it all came back to me, the year the past refused to stay buried. I was 12 when I first trespassed into the sacred part of the forest, the land behind the crooked birch marked with faded red ochre. It was me, Sam and Mikey, all breathing hard with the thrill of breaking a rule older than our grandfathers' grandfathers. We had laughed then, daring each other to cross the boundary, our feet crunching the underbrush, our voices high and mocking. We were children of the new age, we thought, not bound by the ancient fears and superstitions of our ancestors. Sam found the deer first, a beautiful buck, its antlers wide and commanding, the kind you'd imagine leading the celestial herds in the sky if you believed in those old stories. It watched us, eyes deep and dark as the night itself, unafraid. Mikey, always the bold one, took a step forward, a rock heavy in his hand. He threw it before I could say a word, the stone striking the buck's skull with a sickening crack. The animal's legs buckled, its body hitting the ground with a finality that echoed through the silent trees. We should have left it there, should have run back home, confessed our sins and faced the consequences. But fear, that sharp and urgent fear, gripped us tightly. We dragged the deer deeper into the forest, hid it beneath a mound of leaves, and swore each other to secrecy. The forest watched in silence, the birch trees pale like the bones of the world. Years passed. I moved away for school, left the reservation behind, but something about that day lingered with me, a splinter under my skin that I could never tweeze out. I returned every autumn, drawn by a guilt I couldn't cleanse, walking the paths of red pine forest as if seeking forgiveness from the trees. It was during one of these walks, many years later, when the forest decided it had been silent long enough. The air was crisp, the leaves a riot of dying fire, and the ground littered with the brown husks of acorns. As the sun dipped low, casting long fingers of darkness through the trunks, I heard it, a rustle not of leaves but of something larger. I turned, heart thumping a wild rhythm, and saw the buck. It stood at the edge of the path, antlers broken, one hanging askew, the fur matted with old blood that seemed both fresh and ancient. Its eyes held the deep, unending darkness of before, but this time there was no calm in its gaze, only a hollow anger, a reflection of the betrayal it suffered at our hands. The buck took a step forward, hooves silent on the leaf-strewn path. I couldn't move, caught between the instinct to flee and the weight of my remorse. It came closer, and I saw the wounds we had inflicted, wounds that no creature could survive. Yet here it stood, a spectre of accusation. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the chilling breeze, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." The buck paused, its head tilting as if considering my words, the silence around us dense as fog. Then slowly it turned away, walking back into the depths of the forest, its form growing indistinct until it vanished among the trees. My knees gave out then, and I sat on the cold, damp earth, the weight of the years and the burden of guilt pressing down on me. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and in that moment I felt the eyes of my ancestors, the keepers of the old ways, watching me through the veil of time. That night, I returned to my grandmother's house, her wrinkled hands warm as they clasped mine across the kitchen table. I told her everything, the truth spilling from me like water from a broken jar. She listened, her eyes sad but not surprised, and when I finished, she nodded slowly. "You cannot undo the past," she said, her voice steady, "but you can face it, learn from it. The forest has its own way of teaching, of punishing and forgiving. You are part of this land, and it is part of you. Remember, we are all hunted by what we've done, but we are also offered the chance to make amends." Her words settled in me, a soothing balm to the raw edges of my soul. I knew then that the buck, that haunting vision, was not just a spectre of my guilt, but a messenger from the past, urging me to remember and to respect the old ways, to walk the paths of my ancestors with a careful step and a reverent heart. So now, every autumn, I walk the paths of red pine forest, not just in penance but in homage, A reminder that some boundaries once crossed leave marks deep as scars, but like scars they teach us, painfully, indelibly, about the delicate balance between man and nature, past and present, guilt and redemption. And every year, as the air grows cold and the shadows lengthen, I listen to the bones of the trees, to the whispers of the spirits, and I remember.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.